At first glance, this mountain chain was nothing but endless rock, a wall stretching thousands of miles, barren, impassable, worthless. And yet in 1803, Thomas Jefferson staked $15 million on this wilderness. Critics called it Jefferson's folly. No cities, no roads, just plains and jagged peaks. Yet north of the border, Britain's Hudson's Bay Company saw something else. Explorers like Alexander Mackenzie found not a barrier, but a gateway to prairies, rivers, and the future of Canada's west. What seemed useless became the foundation of two nations. Beneath these peaks lay gold, silver, oil, and copper worth trillions. And above all, geography itself shaping prosperity. Today, the US and Canada hold nearly 28% of global GDP, while making up just 5% of the world's population. All of it traces back to a chain of mountains, stretching 3,000 miles. Mountains that forged not just a landscape, but the destiny of a continent. This is the Rockies. In the early 1800s, the United States was still a fragile young republic, hugging the eastern edge of North America. Beyond the Mississippi River lay an ocean of wilderness, forests, plains, and jagged mountains few Europeans had ever crossed. And in 1803, that wilderness came up for sale. France, under Napoleon Bonaparte, was desperate for cash. Wars in Europe drained the treasury, and a failed campaign in the Caribbean convinced Napoleon that an American empire was no longer worth the effort. For him, the land was useless, a liability he couldn't afford to defend. For Thomas Jefferson, however, it was an opportunity. He authorized the purchase of 828,000 square miles for $15 million, about 4 cents an acre. It instantly doubled the size of the United States. But the reaction at home was brutal. Critics mocked the deal as a reckless folly. To them, the deal made no sense. The new territory was a barren expanse. No cities, no roads, no farmland they didn't yet recognize as useful. And stretching across the horizon was a massive obstacle, a wall of stone that most settlers believed could never be crossed. To many Americans, Jefferson had wasted the nation's money on land that would never be valuable. Yet the story of this wilderness wasn't just American. To the north, Britain's Hudson's Bay Company was pushing deeper into the interior, seeking trade routes across the same forbidding mountains. In 1793, Alexander Mackenzie became the first European to cross them to the Pacific, proving they were not impenetrable, only misunderstood. Where Americans saw Jefferson's folly, Britain's explorers saw the outline of what would later become Western Canada. What few on either side of the border understood was that these gambles, Jefferson's purchase and Britain's explorations, had just secured the geographic foundation for North America's rise. Hidden in that wilderness were mountains that would shape the destiny of two nations. Jefferson's critics saw only wilderness, a barren expanse of plains and jagged peaks. But what he had truly purchased wasn't empty land at all. He had secured the backbone of an entire continent. The Rocky Mountains are unlike any other mountain system on Earth. Stretching 3,000 miles, from New Mexico's desert peaks to Canada's frozen summits, they form the longest mountain chain in North America, and one of the most geographically powerful. But calling them a mountain range undersells their true nature. The Rockies are actually over 100 separate mountain ranges, merged into one massive system over millions of years. The Front Range in Colorado, the Sangre de Cristo in New Mexico, the Canadian Rockies in Alberta and British Columbia, each distinct, yet part of something far greater. This isn't just impressive, it's strategically unique. Few other continents have a mountain spine as long or as centrally positioned. The Andes are longer, but much narrower, creating a barrier rather than a foundation. The Himalayas are taller, but shorter, dividing regions instead of uniting them. The Alps fragment across multiple countries, creating political divisions rather than continental unity. The Rockies average 10,000 feet in elevation, with over 100 peaks exceeding 14,000 feet. Mount Elbert in Colorado reaches 14,440 feet. Mount Robson in Canada towers at 12,972 feet. But their true power isn't in height, it's in position and scope. These mountains sit perfectly positioned to capture moisture from Pacific storms. As air masses move inland from the ocean, they hit the western slopes and dump their water as snow and rain. This creates the largest natural water collection and distribution system in North America. Running along their crest is the Continental Divide, perhaps the most important geographic line on the continent. On the US side, it separates rivers flowing west to the Pacific, from those flowing east into the Mississippi and Gulf of Mexico. In Canada, the same divide splits rivers toward the Pacific, from those feeding Hudson Bay and the Arctic Ocean. The backbone doesn't just divide, it organizes the waters of an entire continent. This makes the Rockies one of the greatest natural water distribution systems on Earth. They don't just create rivers, they shape climates. The western slopes nurture dense forests and fertile valleys. The eastern slopes cast a rain shadow that gave rise to the Great Plains in the US, and the Canadian prairies, together, the breadbasket of the world. Without the Rockies, the interior of North America would resemble the dry steppes of Central Asia. Instead, they act as a continental climate engine, moderating extremes and creating the predictability that allowed large-scale agriculture, industry, and population growth to flourish. Jefferson may not have understood the science, but he sensed the truth. Control the continental spine, and you control the continent's future. Britain's fur traders and Canadian settlers would eventually reach the same conclusion. If the Rockies were the continent's spine, they were also its treasure vault. Beneath those peaks lay resources that would fuel two nations' rise to power. What Jefferson intuited in 1803 became reality in 1859, when prospectors discovered gold near Pikes Peak, Colorado. The Colorado Gold Rush pulled in over $1 billion worth of gold, equivalent to $30 billion today. Boomtowns sprang up overnight, and the rush transformed Denver from a frontier outpost into a permanent city. But the US rushes were only one side of the story. North of the border, the Fraser Canyon Gold Rush of 1858 drew tens of thousands to British Columbia, setting off a wave of settlement that helped solidify Canada's hold on its western territories. A decade later, the Caribou Gold Rush built entire towns in the Canadian interior. These parallel booms made gold not just a US phenomenon, but a continental one. The riches didn't stop with gold. The Comstock lode in Nevada yielded $400 million in silver. The Cripple Creek district in Colorado added another $500 million in gold. And Montana's Butte copper mines produced over $20 billion, earning the nickname the richest hill on Earth. Meanwhile, Canada's Kootenay region became a major supplier of silver, lead, and zinc, linking its mountain towns directly into global markets. Beyond precious metals, the Rockies contained vast reserves of copper, lead, zinc, molybdenum, and uranium. Colorado's Climax mine became the world's largest molybdenum producer, essential for strengthening steel and supplying military industries. On the Canadian side, Saskatchewan's Athabasca Basin, just beyond the Rockies' northern edge, became the world's richest uranium deposit, exporting fuel that would one day power both nuclear energy and nuclear deterrence. Then came the energy revolution. In 1914, Alberta struck oil at Turner Valley, launching Canada's energy industry. Today, Alberta's oil sands contain about 170 billion barrels of proven reserves, the third largest in the world. Wyoming still pumps around 200,000 barrels daily, while natural gas fields in Colorado and British Columbia power modern grids. The numbers are staggering. Mining in the Rocky Mountain states and provinces contributes more than $50 billion annually to the North American economy. Colorado alone produces $2 billion in minerals every year. Alberta's oil industry generates over $100 billion in economic activity. And the treasure isn't just old-world metals and fuels. The Rockies contain rare earth elements critical for smartphones, electric vehicles, and renewable energy. These resources give North America strategic independence, at a time when much of the world depends on Chinese suppliers. This mineral wealth created something unprecedented, a continent that could supply its own raw materials. While Europe relied on African minerals and Asia depended on Middle Eastern oil, North America found everything it needed in its own backyard. The integration was revolutionary. Raw materials could be extracted from the Rockies, processed in nearby industrial hubs like Denver, Calgary, and Salt Lake City, and shipped east or west via railroads. Each boom built infrastructure. The Colorado Gold Rush fueled Denver, the silver boom created Leadville, and the Alberta oil boom turned Calgary into a global energy capital. What critics once mocked as Jefferson's folly had become North America's treasure vault, the resource engine that powered its rise to superpower status. The Rockies weren't just mountains, they were a treasure vault that turned North America into an industrial powerhouse. And if you're fascinated by how geography shapes power and prosperity, hit that like button and make sure you subscribe. Here on GeoZyra, we've got more stories coming, from deserts that created empires to rivers that built civilizations. All right, let's get back to the Rockies. If the Rockies were a vault of minerals and energy, they were also something far more valuable: the water tower of North America. Every winter, storms rolling in from the Pacific crash into the mountains, releasing snow and ice that pile high on the peaks. That snowpack stores an astonishing 20 million acre-feet of water each year. Come spring, it melts and flows down in every direction, feeding the rivers that keep the continent alive. From the Rockies flow 7 of North America's great river systems: the Colorado, the Missouri, the Arkansas, the Platte, the Snake, the Columbia, and the Saskatchewan. The Missouri alone drains 1/6 of the United States. The Columbia generates nearly half of America's hydroelectric power, enough to power 12 million homes. In Canada, the Saskatchewan River system irrigates the prairies, while the Fraser and Bow rivers sustain both agriculture and salmon fisheries. Together, these rivers irrigate tens of millions of acres of farmland across the Great Plains and the Canadian prairies. The results are staggering. The Great Plains, watered by Rocky Mountain rivers, became one of the most productive agricultural regions on Earth. 40% of America's wheat, 35% of its corn, and 3/4 of its beef are raised here. Canada adds its own breadbasket. The prairie provinces supply over 20% of the world's traded wheat and are among the largest exporters of canola and barley. This output feeds more than 300 million North Americans and hundreds of millions more overseas. It generates over $200 billion in US exports and another $75 billion in Canadian agri-food exports every year. But the Rockies' water empire doesn't just sustain crops, it sustains cities. Denver's 2.9 million residents drink water that begins as snowflakes 100 miles away. Calgary's 1.3 million people rely entirely on Canadian Rocky meltwater. Across the West, no major city survives without these mountains silently feeding their reservoirs. And then there is power. Hydroelectric dams on Rocky Mountain rivers supply immense amounts of clean energy. In Canada, rivers flowing from the Rockies generate 60% of the nation's electricity. The Columbia alone produces enough power for 12 million homes, and the Peace and Athabasca river systems anchor Canada's grid in the west. This water control grants North America an advantage few other regions can claim: reliability. Where Australia and Africa face chronic droughts, and Asia struggles with water conflicts, the Rockies guarantee the continent steady supplies even in dry years. Snowpack acts like a natural savings account, storing water when it falls, releasing it slowly when it's needed most. Industries built on this flow, from agriculture to energy to manufacturing, generate hundreds of billions each year. Entire economies depend on it. Jefferson may not have known it in 1803, but by buying the Rockies, he had secured not just gold and oil, but something far rarer: a self-sustaining water system that would keep North America thriving when other continents faltered. The Rockies weren't just mountains, they were a continental lifeline, a liquid empire running from summit to sea. The Rockies provided wealth, they provided water, but they also gave North America something just as decisive: security. For centuries, the mountains stood as a natural fortress, a 3,000-mile barrier so rugged that no invading army could realistically cross it. Where Europe's flat plains invited endless wars, the Rockies gave the United States and Canada strategic depth, a shield that made their heartlands almost untouchable. That shield became more than symbolic during the Cold War. In Colorado, engineers carved into 2,000 feet of granite to build NORAD headquarters inside Cheyenne Mountain, a command center designed to survive nuclear war. But NORAD was not an American project alone. It has always been a binational command, jointly run by the US and Canada. Canada's North Warning System, a string of radar stations stretching across the Arctic, linked directly into NORAD's Rocky Mountain Nerve Center. At the same time, Canada's own command center in North Bay, Ontario was carved deep underground, mirroring Cheyenne Mountain and ensuring redundancy for the defense of the entire continent. Across Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and North Dakota, 450 Minuteman missile silos were hidden in plains and foothills, protected by the surrounding terrain. On the Canadian side, the Rockies provided air defense corridors where CF-18 fighters patrolled, and their high-altitude ridges hosted radar and communication systems capable of scanning skies and space for threats, long before they reached coastal cities. Meanwhile, the extreme terrain turned into a training ground. Soldiers who mastered the Rockies' harsh winters and thin air could fight anywhere in the world, from Afghanistan's peaks to the Arctic's frozen fields. Canadian forces, too, honed mountain warfare in the Rockies, preparing troops for operations in Europe and the Arctic. This military presence transformed the Rockies into an economic engine. Colorado Springs alone hosts 5 major installations, employing 40,000 people. Aerospace giants like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Raytheon set up shop nearby, creating an aerospace cluster that today employs more than 50,000 people and generates $15 billion annually. Canada developed its own aerospace powerhouse in the same corridor. Calgary and Edmonton became hubs for defense technology and logistics, while Canada's aerospace industry, anchored by firms like Bombardier, MDA, and Pratt & Whitney Canada, turned the broader Rocky Mountain region into a continental center of aerospace engineering. But the Rockies' strategic role didn't end with the Cold War. The same geography that protected missiles now powers an innovation economy. The mountain's cool climate and abundant hydroelectric power make them ideal for data centers. Google, Microsoft, and Amazon operate massive facilities here, secured by both geography and infrastructure. In Canada, Vancouver and Calgary have become magnets for cloud services, clean tech firms, and AI startups, leveraging both hydroelectric power and a skilled workforce. Wind sweeps across Wyoming's plateaus, now producing over 20% of the state's electricity. Colorado generates over 40% of its power from renewables. The same ridges that once shielded armies now spin turbines that drive a green energy transition. The Rockies also host some of the world's most advanced research hubs, from Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico to the National Renewable Energy Lab and NOAA's Earth System Research Laboratory in Colorado, to Canada's University of Calgary Research Institutes on Energy Transition, and the Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions in British Columbia. Cities once seen as remote outposts have transformed into innovation hubs. Denver employs over 130,000 in technology jobs, while Boulder has the highest concentration of software engineers per capita in the US. In Canada, Calgary has rebranded from oil capital to tech capital, with over 40,000 employed in its fast-growing tech sector. Vancouver has become one of North America's top AI and video game development clusters, attracting billions in venture funding. Across both sides of the Rockies, venture capital investment has surged several-fold since 2010, fueling startups in aerospace, renewable energy, and AI. What began as a fortress has become a frontier, not of defense, but of innovation. The Rockies, once dismissed as obstacles, are now the backbone of America's defense and the launchpad of its future economy. From Jefferson's gamble to today's global economy, the Rockies have been more than mountains. They've been the foundation of 2 superpowers. The United States and Canada together control nearly 28% of global GDP, despite having only 5% of the world's population. Their combined economies are worth $45 trillion annually, more than the entire European Union. The reason lies in geography. The Rockies gave North America something no rival possesses: self-sufficiency. Since 1919, the US has been a net energy exporter, producing nearly all of the fossil fuel energy it consumes. Canada remains one of the world's top energy exporters. Around 85 to 90% of food consumed in North America is produced domestically, with imports mostly covering fruits and specialty crops. Most of its critical minerals, oil, gas, wheat, beef, copper, uranium, and even rare earths, all secured within its borders. Where Europe depends on imports and Asia struggles with scarcity, North America feeds itself, powers itself, and arms itself with resources from its own land. That security underpins $4 trillion in annual trade. The US and Canada share the largest bilateral trading relationship on Earth, worth nearly $900 billion annually. From oil flowing through Alberta's pipelines, to wheat shipped down the Missouri and Saskatchewan rivers, to silicon chips powered by Rocky Mountain hydroelectric dams, the mountains fuel every artery of commerce. The Rockies also anchor population and growth. Colorado, Utah, and Idaho are among the fastest growing states, while Alberta and British Columbia lead Canada's population growth, attracting industries, workers, and families drawn by opportunity and quality of life. Interstate highways, railways, pipelines, and fiber optic cables now cross terrain once thought impassable, turning barriers into bridges between the Atlantic and Pacific economies. As the planet warms, the Rockies offer climate resilience. Their elevations provide cooler temperatures, vast snowpack, and fewer extreme weather risks compared to coastal or desert regions. In Canada, the snow-fed prairies remain one of the world's most reliable breadbaskets, while hydropower-rich provinces like British Columbia and Manitoba supply clean, renewable energy. In a century defined by climate change, this stability will matter even more. No other continent combines this mix of defense, resources, and resilience. Europe lacks protective mountain barriers. Asia faces bitter water conflicts. Africa suffers from fragmentation. But North America's Rockies deliver it all: wealth, security, and unity. And it all began with Jefferson's $15 million gamble on what seemed like worthless wilderness. What looked like an obstacle became the very foundation of North American dominance. From mineral vaults to rivers of life, from strategic fortresses to corridors of innovation, the Rockies remain the backbone of a superpower. This is the Rockies. If you found this documentary of the Rockies eye-opening, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. We've got more powerful stories ahead about how geography shapes the destiny of nations.